Welcome to Surrogacy Daddy, the podcast about a queer and ethically driven surrogacy journey. Episode 2: Being Gay and Wanting a Child. What did I get myself into, Aube, my love? Telling the intimate story that brought you into the world, while at the same time trying to make it interesting so that other people can listen and better understand what it's really all about. It's hard to find the right balance. In any case, it's important to remember that my message is not universal. It is unique in the sense that I can only tell our story. I would never say that every surrogacy in the world goes well, because that would be wrong, stupid, and completely irresponsible. There are indeed surrogate pregnancies that take place in sordid conditions, and we must continue to fight against networks that exploit women's body in general, just as we do against mafia prostitution networks, for example. The European Parliament has just added to the definition of human trafficking the fact of forcing a woman to bear a child against her will for the benefit of third parties. We can only welcome this news. Everything must be done to protect these women who are being exploited. On the other hand, what I'm saying is that our own journey, the one that led to your birth, through the choices we made, the attention we paid to certain details, and the ethical rigor shown by us and the people we worked with, proves that it is possible to do it in a way that respects all the parties involved, starting with the woman who carried you. We'll talk about her a lot, because she's the superhero of this story. But before we get to that, let's talk about how the desire for a child came for us. For a queer person, there's nothing obvious about it. It's often years of reflection and preparation. For us, between the moment we decided to have a child and your birth, there were almost 3 years. It's as if we had conceived you in our thoughts and hopes before we conceived you with cells. And always with so much love from the very first second. For me personally, I can't explain why, but I've always wanted and known that I'd have a child one day. As far back as I can remember, in the primary school, it was already clear to me, without being an obsession. When I became big brother, I even remember saying to myself, well, that will prepare me better. And then, my job as a student was youth leader in a daycare center. And I had specifically asked for kindergarten, much to the surprise of the management team. And I never doubted about having a child, despite my development as a gay man. I think I was kind of in denial about the practical side. I would tell myself, well, we'll see when the day comes. Until then, solutions will exist. That's it. As for your other dad, there was ups and downs. And then there was a moment when, before we met, he had given up. Then, when he met me, he changed his mind. But the notion of giving up is something you hear a lot in queer testimonials about parenthood. Having a child for a queer couple, and even more for a gay man, isn't obvious at all. Because as a man without a uterus, a sexual act doesn't allow us to biologically create one, of course, but that's not all. The simple desire to have one child is complicated for 2 main reasons, I believe. Firstly, we lack models and representations of queer families that would give hope and desire to others. Movies, books, songs, paintings. Our collective imaginations are almost empty of homoparental families represented in a normal way, without it being a topic in itself. And this has a profound impact on us. We're culturally programmed not to want to become parents. The second reason is even sadder. The few people who do grow this desire are viewed with suspicion on 2 levels of intensity. The first level stems from patriarchy, which has relegated women to the sole care of children and the household. Consequently, with 2 dads, if this doctrine is to be believed, things cannot go well for the child. The daddies will lack of love, care, gentleness, attention, instincts, and innate ability to look after a baby properly. All those things that are uniquely associated with motherhood. Of course, all of this is false and has already proven wrong by scientific studies in various fields, psychology, social sciences, pediatrics, etc. Men can take care of babies just as well as women, provided that they want to and make the effort required. But this bias is not insignificant. It's the legacy of centuries of male domination and the assignment of women to the home. I mentioned this because it explains why when a straight father who benefits from a system that is ultra-indulgent towards him explains to me that surrogacy necessarily means the submission of the woman carrying the child, I have a little less patience in my argument than when it's a woman who knows what an oppressive system means. And there's another kind of suspicion towards gay parents, and especially towards gay men, I have found in my experience. In our representations, our culture, and our language, there is still confusion between homosexuality and pedocriminality. For example, the French word for faggot, which is pédé, and is the most common insult used to refer to us, comes from pédéraste, which is a man who has sexual relations with boys much younger than himself, particularly in ancient Greece. It's as if this insult had a sharp and poisonous blade. The sharpness of saying what we are, men who love men, and making it an insult somehow, but also the poison of accusing us of what we are not, criminals who abuse children. Pretty effective for an insult. No wonder some people in the gay community are trying to reclaim the term, using it with pride to gloss over its meaning. But that's one example, and there are many similar ones. This confusion is cleverly maintained by anti-homosexual people and movements. So, when as a gay man, you're with a baby or a child, you know you will make most people uncomfortable, and they will question themselves if you are a risk for the baby. And the worst part is that they will think that they are well-intentioned and protecting the child. What they don't know or don't want to know is that they've been culturally programmed to belittle and distrust us. Now, we also have to face reality. According to the French Independent Commission on Incest and Sexual Violence Against Children, the CIIVISE, in 97% of cases of child abuse, the aggressor is a man. And in 27% of cases, it is the child's father. So, in a way, I can see where this terrible suspicion comes from. They say to themselves, well, 2 men, 2 dads, twice the risk for the child. It's pretty frightening when you think about it. But anyway, I'll take the time to come back in another episode to explain how your other dad and I confronted our own masculinity in our role as fathers. How we tried to deconstruct, as much as we could, the toxicity that was instilled in us by patriarchy. It's a job that never stops. All this means that being gay and wanting a child is already a milestone, a battle won over violent normality in a war against the rest of the world. And when you've really made up your mind to have a child, the obstacles just keep piling up. That's what I'm going to tell you now. When your other dad and I said to each other, we're ready, let's go, we gave ourselves a whole year from January 1st to December 31st to find out how we could proceed. What were the possible procedures for us to become parents? That was in 2021. And I'm going to tell you about that year because it was crucial to the rest of our journey. By doing a basic research, we quickly realized that there were 3 main ways for us to become parents: adoption, co-parenting, and assisted reproductive technology with a surrogacy. So there isn't much suspense because you know we chose surrogacy. But at the very beginning, we didn't go for that at all. It was more adoption. It seemed obvious. We want a child, there are children who need parents, it's perfect. We did some research on websites and talked to some gay friends who had gone through the process a few years before. First of all, in France, it's only since 2013 in gay marriage that we've been allowed to adopt fully and completely because we had to be married to do so. Before that, with no marriage possible for us, we generally had to pretend to be single, but then the other husband, in hiding, had no rights over the child, which obviously was a problem. It was only in 2022, so very recently, that this condition was erased. Now, all couples can adopt, married or not, straight or gay. In France, to adopt, you first need approval. This involves a series of administrative and legal formalities, as well as interviews with psychologists, whose job is to assess whether the couple is fit to welcome a child under the right conditions, including a home inspection. We're not asking that much of fertile heterosexual couples, but I can understand the intention. These children already have a complicated start in life, so we want the rest to be as smooth as possible, I guess. Obtaining this approval takes between a year and a half. For us, it would probably have taken a little longer because we didn't have a place that, as is, could have welcomed you. And it's often the case with heterosexuals who move out when the woman is pregnant. Once a case is approved, there is a waiting list managed at local level. We were told that it would take an average of 3 years and that for files that weren't showing perfect standards, it could be 5 years or much more. But after 5 years, you lose your approval and have to start all over again. So why does it take so long? In fact, there is a local commission called the Family Council, which meets regularly and allocates files according to the order of arrival, but also according to the quality of the files. And that's where it gets complicated, because being gay is very often considered as a bad point. In some regions, it's even a reason enough for refusal. In 2018, in the middle of a live broadcast on a French radio, one of the heads of the adoption department in a region in France said that gay families can adopt, but only so-called non-typical children. And that means children who are ill or disabled or born in violent conditions such as from a rape or in prison. Since the scandal, I have the impression that people started to speak out. There are more and more investigations and in-depth articles on adoption discrimination all over in France. We found a lot of content converging in the same direction. Adopting as a gay man is often a discriminatory, humiliating, and profoundly unfair process. Many give up. Even the National Council for Adoptions has admitted that, quote, the composition of family councils remains opaque, and the place of religious associations appears to be predominant, end quote. It's crazy to think that we're listening to the advice of religious communities that have been convicted of pedocriminality to wonder whether a couple of gay or lesbian parents is right for a child. It's kind of a joke when you think about it, because the statistics are crystal clear. A child is much safer with a drag queen than with a priest. But your dad and I didn't stop there. We thought it's worth the fight for a child who will then live with a family who will love him or her very much. And the more I read articles about that, the more I was convinced that we could do it, that we had the shoulders, that we'd know how to take care of a child with a complicated start in life, that we'd have that kind of humanity. Then, one day, I was talking about it with a friend, and she said she felt some tension, that she sensed resistance in the way I was talking about it, that I didn't seem serene, and I was not, as if I wanted to prove something to the rest of the world who treated us like monsters. And she said to me, "What is your goal? Is it a parenting project or a project to help children in difficulty? Stop trying to save the world. Allow yourself to think about your parenthood as a basic straight couple would, without feeling obliged to be humanistic at the same time. Do you think straight fathers explore adoption when they want their first child? It's still very rare, and no one expects them to. Allow yourself the same selfishness. And if you really want to help children, if this is what you want, you don't need to be a parent to do that. You can start tomorrow in an association. You don't have to be a superhero to be a dad. And you don't have to be a dad to be a superhero." Aube, I got one of the biggest slaps of my life. What she said to me was so at odds with what I was forcing myself to feel that it made me feel dizzy. It took me several days to unfold the full depth of what she had just pointed out to me. And then, one morning, I started to feel angry. So I'm not telling you it's good or healthy or that it's right. I'm just telling you that it is what I suddenly felt. A great anger for this world that discriminates, violates, and marginalizes gays by claiming that we're not good enough to be part of the normality, but also asks them to take care of the children who need the most protection and attention. It's a bit like grouping together the people who start out with negative points according to the standards and weighing them down a little more before putting them in the great race of life while giving them a moral lesson. It made me furious. All this hypocrisy, all this false piety, the first victims of which are these children who find themselves at the intersection of these different systems of oppression. And I finally came to the following thought. Since the world of the normal is so noble, so valiant, let it take care of its own children injured at birth. It was hard and cold, and I think I've come a long way since then. But at that moment, it just came to me like that. And I realized that all the determination I had before was mostly to heal my own wounds caused by a system that was insulting and violent towards us. We will prove to you that we can be good fathers even with the kids that you are avoiding. You get the idea. But hey, we don't become parents to heal our own wounds, right? And once that this was out in the open, I had changed my perspective. I talked to your second dad about it, and he understood. For him, the main issue was the intersectional aspects, where the child would end up in a homoparental family, systemically discriminated, and that would be added to his or her heritage as an adopted child, perhaps non-white, perhaps handicapped, or everything that the rest of our society makes you feel like a burden. He was worried that this legacy would be heavy not only on our shoulders as parents, but also on you, our child. As a result, we abandoned adoption. Since then, I've had other conversations about adoption. And it's been pointed out to me that, on the contrary, families like ours know what it means to be perceived as different. And that through our experience, we could have helped the child navigate the sometimes troubled waters of our societal systems of inclusion and exclusion. I believe this to be true. If I hadn't been angry, maybe I'd have seen it more clearly. But what's certain is that, contrary to what a lot of people think, unfortunately, there is nothing obvious about adoption in LGBTQIA+ couples. In fact, it would have made it particularly difficult despite the impressive work done by queer family associations. Maybe things have improved a bit since then. I hope they have. But in any case, for us, it was no longer an option. So we turn to the next one, co-parenting. This involves creating and raising a child in partnership with another family, whether a single woman or a couple, straight or lesbian. Custody is then generally shared in a comparable way to divorced parents, except that there are no breakup liabilities and everyone normally gets along very well. We know several people who have done this in our circle, with long-standing friends or with people met on websites or by word of mouth. So we were able to really think through the pros and cons. As I'm telling your story and co-parenting is not part of it, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But we really thought about it for a long time. It lined up pretty well with our interest for sharing communities and for the concept of enlarged and chosen family. But in our case, there were two major obstacles. One, we didn't have any long-time friends who felt ready to make such a commitment with us. And two, the problem of geographical mobility. We weren't sure we wanted to stay where we are today, and that makes everything complicated. Already as a couple, but then with 3 or 4 people, it's mission impossible. When you go down this road, you don't move out of town anymore. So in the end, after giving it a lot of thought, we drew the line at co-parenting. There was one last option. It was available to us because we could afford it, and that is a surrogacy. What did we know about surrogacy at the very beginning? How did we find out about it? And how did we end up making an informed decision? That's all we're going to talk about in the next episode, where I'll explain the major phases that make up a surrogacy journey, as well as the main stakeholders and partners. Hopefully, this will give you a much clearer idea of what's behind that word. So, shall we continue? Okay? Non mais alors toi...